This is a conversation with General Ben Hodges, a former commander of the US Army Europe and one of the most respected commentators on defense and strategy today. He was kind enough to come back on the podcast to talk about some pretty major strategic shifts that are happening in the war in Ukraine, about why he believes that Ukraine is starting to turn the tide of the war in its favor, why are policymakers in Europe and the US becoming much more confident about Ukraine's chances, about the impact of the Ukrainian new strategies and tactics, and how Ukraine found Russia's weak spot, and why he believes that Russia is increasingly bleeding out, and why time is not on its side anymore, and why he thinks that Russia will be unable to wage the war beyond next year. This podcast and interviews like this can exist only thanks to its supporters on Patreon, to whom I'm deeply grateful, and who get a bunch of perks in return for their support, including the full version of this and other episodes, and additional bonus content. And now, enjoy the conversation. All right, so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you once again for the privilege.
So I want to start talking about Ukraine. And I feel that the general mood around the war has been changing a little bit. And, although the mood in the media and reality on the ground can be two different things, I still feel that the situation is starting to look a little better and more hopeful for Ukraine. And on the other hand, a little worse for Russia strategically. And I wonder if you would agree with that, if you feel that shift as well. And what is your overall big picture view strategically where we are at the war at the moment?
So I agree with you completely that there is a mood change. I've been at 3 or 4 different security conferences over the last few weeks, and you could just feel it, whether it was up in Finland or Poland or Spain and in between. It feels a little different. Now, I think people in your audience who know me or who have followed what I say, I have always believed that Ukraine was going to win this war and that Russia was moving towards trouble. But now it feels like, at least in the White House, now they have like, holy shit, the Ukrainians are doing good. The Russians are failing. And other people are now starting to realize this false narrative out there that the Russians, of course, were pushing, that it was inevitable that they would win. There was no way that little Ukraine could beat mighty Russia. And that's been proven false. Now, how's the war going depends a little bit on where you're fighting. If you're in a trench outside Pokrovsk, or if you're in a city that is constantly hit by Russian missiles, it's terrible. But if you can step back from the terrible tactical situation and look at the bigger picture, there's no way that Russia, in my view, can actually defeat Ukraine unless we just quit. I mean, they don't, unlike their grandfathers, they don't possess the ability to break through Ukrainian defenses and then exploit it. I mean, that just doesn't exist. They're riding around in motorcycles and golf carts, trying to infiltrate little groups. And that's why they've had 1 million casualties and only increased their territorial gain by about 1% over the last year and a half. I mean, that's worse than in the First World War. So I think they just don't have that ability to overwhelm Ukraine. On the other hand, the Ukrainians, of course, do not by themselves have the ability to drive Russia back. But what they have done, I think, very wisely, they've focused on destroying Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, specifically Russia's ability to export oil. Without that, then I don't see how Russia continues in the war beyond next year. This is what pays for everything. Their economy already is, I think, shaky. And if Ukraine is able to keep hitting these, not the refineries that make gas for Russian cars, I don't care about that. I mean, I'm happy to see them miserable. But what really matters for the war is wrecking their ability to export oil. And it would be amazing if we in the West got serious about disruption of the shadow fleet vessels as well, the ones that are heading out through the Baltic Sea in particular, loaded with oil headed to India and China and Turkey.
Well, so that's definitely one of the things that seems to have been behind the mood shift that you've talked about, the continuous Ukrainian campaign hitting Russian refineries. What do you think that the impact has been so far? And if it is sustained, if Ukraine manages to sustain it, what do you think that the impact could be? And perhaps also, why do you think that it's different this time to when Ukraine was deploying the same strategy in previous years?
Well, this is the first time they've had the ability to routinely hit, like, 2 or 3 times a week, a major refinery. I mean, these are huge distances. Um, in an interesting twist of history, uh, in the past, Russia's great strength was based on its size. I mean, the vastness of Russia. So that invaders like Napoleon or Hitler, they may make big gains, but eventually they just get swallowed up by the size of Russia. That was a strength, as well as the population and the fact that the czars and then Stalin didn't care how many casualties they had. Now that vastness is a vulnerability because they can't possibly cover everything, all the different infrastructure that they can't cover it. And um, so they're constantly having to move around radar, air defense systems, trying to guess where the Ukrainians are going to attack next. The Ukrainians are getting very good at picking where are the gaps when something moves, then they go there. Um, and the fact that Ukrainian defense industry has now developed longer range weapons that can carry a meaningful payload. It's not just the distance, it's can it go that far and have a warhead that could actually wreck a oil storage facility, for example. So it's those combination of things, and of course that has an impact elsewhere. Since they cannot cover everything, they have to make decisions about what do they leave vulnerable, and so the Ukrainians just keep pounding that. And of course, the population of Russia. I'm surprised how many people still think of Russia as having 300 million people, like the Soviet Union. They started this war with about 135, 140 million, not a very healthy population. A lot of the smarter, younger kids get the hell out of there. So they don't have endless human resources either.
Well, on that note, I guess if we look apart from the strikes on the Russian refineries and look more at the actual fighting along the front lines, it still seems that Russia is able to generate quite large quantities of soldiers and just keep throwing them to keep pushing Ukrainians back. Do you see that this could or should change anytime soon, or is it something that Russia will be still keep able to keep up for foreseeable future?
Of course, I realized a couple of years ago that I really don't understand what goes on inside Russia. I mean, we don't have um, really good insights about what people are thinking or doing. There certainly is the perception that Russian people can endure forever. I know that's been part of the mythology there, and maybe it's true. Um, but I don't know that they can keep doing what they're doing now. The Kremlin has avoided, for the most part, recruiting people out of Moscow and St. Petersburg for a good reason. They don't want to have a bunch of funerals in Moscow and St. Petersburg where people are like, "Hey, what the hell's going on here?" Because I think not all the elites fully appreciate how bad it is. Now, I did read an article today that said St. Petersburg was expanding its city crematorium to handle all the casualties, up to 250 a day. I mean, nothing says you're losing like having to expand the size of your crematorium, and so I think that they may do yet again another big call up mobilization of some sort. But having bodies is one thing. Then they have to be equipped. Then they have to be trained. Then they have to be put into units. Then they have to be put into the fight. And then what? I mean, they just don't have, at least that I can see, um, capable formations that are well trained, ready to go. All the best formations, the elite, the airborne, the naval infantry, they have been bled out 2 or 3 times. So while they may still have the same name, it's definitely not the same quality. And yes, Russia will continue to push bodies into this fight, but the Ukrainians have figured this out. They've gotten much better at fortifications, defenses, and also I think they have wisely, now that they can see and understand how the Russians are attacking, they don't have everybody crowded up on the trench line where they get hammered by drones and artillery. They've, I think, have a smarter way of how they are manned in their defenses. Now, of course, anybody that's paying attention to all this knows that Ukraine has its own manpower challenges. There's no doubt about that. Um, it feels like they have made some headway on this as a problem. I don't think that they have used women as effectively as they could as soldiers. I think there's still a traditional view about women in combat. They have thousands of women, but I don't think they have fully employed them uniformly as well as they could. But this will be a decision for the government.
I think that's a good point about the women and the use of them by Ukraine. If you look at both of those trends and everything that's been happening, and what's been working in maybe Ukraine's favor and against Russia, what's your sense and expectation of what might be happening strategically in the war in, I guess, until the end of the year, in the coming months, but more importantly, throughout the next year?
Well, of course, what happens strategically will depend a lot on what happens outside of Ukraine. I think you've got, my own country, the United States, I think, is largely seen as not dependable for Ukraine. I heard the former foreign minister Dmitry Kuleba, the other day. He said, they think now if they get anything from the U.S., they consider it a bonus. So in other words, they whether it's intelligence or ammunition or weapons or whatever, it's a bonus because the administration is so inconsistent and has not delivered. I mean, there was headlines about tomahawks. Maybe, maybe not. I'd love it if we do give that, but I just don't have confidence that it's going to happen because the president does not follow through on these things. And also, to be honest, I think some people in the Department of Defense are not carrying out his directions to the way they should for different. Now, that's not news. Every department has internal disagreements. I mean, that's power struggles. That it in itself is not news. In this case, it matters because we're talking about a struggle inside the Defense Department about support for Ukraine, support for Europe, Indo-Pacific, or is it our own Western Hemisphere? What's the priority? And so I think they haven't really sorted that out yet. And we don't have our traditional national security staff in place. The administration got rid of all that. Secretary Rubio is now dual-hatted. I mean, both of these are full-time jobs. I don't know how he does that. So it's not surprising that we would have some inconsistencies. And then Europe, Europe is still unbelievably can't come to grips with the fact that Russia is at war with us. I mean, come on, we can track a meteor 3,000 light years in space and predict where it's going to be and how close it'll pass to Earth, but we can't figure out where drones are coming from in the Baltic Sea. How is that possible? The technology is there certainly, but it's not a priority, not yet. And even Chancellor Merz, who has been very forward-leaning and strong, even he said, Russia's at war with us, but we're not at war with Russia. It's a crisis, but we're not at war. And the Russians, they see that and they laugh. And so we need to, even if we don't want to say we're at war with them, we need to act with a sense of urgency. Otherwise, what the Russians are doing now is going to drag us into an actual conflict. If we don't start pounding them now with economic means or knocking down these drones, seizing shadow fleet vessels. If we don't do that, it's just going to creep like weeds in your garden, and then you can't make it.
I want to take a quick break here to make a little announcement. I love maps, historical maps, geographic maps, all kinds of maps. I've got a bunch of them on my walls, and there's just something about looking at a beautiful map that I find for some reason really satisfying. And because I also love geopolitics, I always wanted a map that would both look beautiful and actually have geopolitics as its focus, to capture and visualize balance of power. And since that didn't really exist, I decided to make one. It's called Geopolitics of the Western Pacific, and it's a physical, limited edition map print that I created together with a professional designer. It shows the strategic flashpoints of the region from Taiwan to North Korea and the South China Sea, and all the key bases, invasion routes, missile ranges, and everything else. And it's presented in a way that's actually beautiful enough to hang on your wall. I basically made it for myself, but if you're also a geopolitics and a map nerd, you might like it as much as I do. It's a very limited run, available only from now until a few weeks before Christmas or until it sells out. So if you'd like one for yourself or as a Christmas gift, you can get it now using the link in the description. And now, back to the video. Well, you've mentioned the sort of shifting policies of Donald Trump. And one of the things that he said recently in one of those big policy shifts, or what seems like it, is that he thinks that Ukraine should retake all of its territories that are occupied by Russia. And I do think it's interesting, and I'd love to hear your view, whether you think that is actually a possibility, or if that is something that could be realistic, and what would need to happen for that to be a possibility? What would need to happen for that to actually happen?
So I have always believed that Ukraine could retake all of its territory. You know, obviously that includes Crimea, and that it should. I mean, what is missing, what has been missing from the beginning, was a clearly defined end state. What do we want this all to look like? And if you don't have a clearly defined strategic end state, then you're never going to be able to develop all the policies you need to have to achieve that end state. So, you know, in the previous administration, it was, we're with you for as long as it takes. What the hell does that mean? I mean, that doesn't mean anything. And then it became, we want to help Ukraine be in the best negotiating position. Why don't we say we want Ukraine to win? I mean, that's in the interest of the United States as well as Europe, that Russia is defeated and forced to live inside its own borders. If they don't, then they're going to keep doing what they're doing now, directly or indirectly, in Georgia, what they tried to do in Moldova and Romania, and certainly what they're doing in the hybrid domain, if you will, against the rest of Europe. They're going to keep doing that. So I was thrilled when President Trump said, you know, Ukraine can win. They are winning. You know, Russia's a paper tiger, and Ukraine ought to be able to take back everything. I mean, people everywhere was like, wow, what piece of intelligence did he just get? And I think he finally, you know, they woke up there, and like when you start seeing what's happening and you realize the actual situation. Now, since he said that, and of course it was interesting, he said Ukraine with the EU can do this. You know, interesting choice of words, the EU. The United States is not in the EU. So it started to sound a little bit to me like he was washing his hands of it. You know, I tried, you know, you guys, it's Europe's fault if we don't get peace. And so I haven't seen anything real happen yet. I saw headlines about U.S. is once again going to share intelligence. You know, real intelligence professionals don't talk about that. You don't advertise, okay, hey, we're helping them with targeting, because the Russians know what many of our capabilities are. So that's why you never talk about what you're doing. The real pros don't talk about that. So I'm a little bit skeptical of that. Obviously, I hope we are. I've always hoped we were doing that, but I don't know that we really are doing that. Same thing with Tomahawk. That's a policy decision, but there's no end state to which it's anchored. That's why I remain skeptical about U.S. about U.S. Approach.
I understand. And maybe just to final thing on Ukraine, if you would make the argument, why do you remain an optimist, or even perhaps if you now you're probably vindicated a little bit more by what's the mood shift. But if you could make your argument, why do you are an optimist as of today, what would that be?
I would say this transition by the Ukrainians, they've stopped the Russians on the ground, and I think there is a stalemate of some size, or some. It's going to last a while, unless there's some new thing that happens on the ground on either side. Okay, so that's one reason, and that has allowed them now to put more and more focus on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. I mean, that really is that's strategic bombing, but with a very specific aim. They're not just bombing the hell out of everything, but very specific targets that will, I think, is a vulnerability for Russia. And then the third thing is, we know from history that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. Clearly, the Ukrainians have greater will than the Russians. It remains to be seen whether or not Western leaders have greater will than Vladimir Putin. And on the logistics side, my sense is that Ukraine's defense industry is increasing even while at war. You've got more and more European companies are investing in Ukraine's defense. You never hear people talking about ammunition shortages anymore. So it feels a little bit like that part has caught up. So these are the reasons. And I have to say, I'm glad that at least the administration, even if they're not doing what all they should be doing, at least they're not talking about, well, Ukraine's going to have to give up some land when they stop that.
Well, I think previously when we spoke, I'm usually more of a skeptic, while you're more of an optimist, and I'm glad that you were right. One more thing that I wanted to talk about is more about Europe, because Europe has seen this new wave of Russian provocations. There have been drones everywhere in Germany, where you live, in Denmark, shot down in Poland, obviously Russian jets in Estonia. What do you think that Europe's reaction to all of that has been? Because some people criticize it, some people praise it. What do you think kind of message is Europe sending with how we're responding to all of that?
The message that Europe is sending as a whole to Russia is, please keep doing it. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Please keep doing it. Now, there's been instances of the right thing being done. The French seizing one of these tankers. It's not entirely certain yet between the Danes and the French what's going on there. Finland, which is usually way in the front of everybody doing the right things, they just had a court case where the ship that probably was responsible for destroying the cables was cleared because they couldn't prove intentionality. I mean, come on. These are not civil criminal cases. This is what I mean about the mindset about being at war. If nothing else, I mean, you just hold on to it forever. I mean, don't treat this like, somebody jaywalking across the street or a misdemeanor. We're talking about criminal negligence. If it was not intentional, it was absolutely criminal negligence. So the Russians see that we're not yet willing to do anything. Now, Poland, while I think the response of sending up F-16s and F-35s was not the right response, and it revealed that we're not prepared yet, the fact is they were up immediately, and they already had the rules of engagement, which allowed them to shoot. So at least that was happening. But we don't have a uniform response and political will and political guidance yet. So the deployment of this Eastern Sentry by NATO should increase and thicken those defenses, if you will. Heightened awareness. I think, I don't know this yet, but the long-standing Baltic Sea air policing and Black Sea air policing missions are being remissioned as air defense missions with the correct rules of engagement. If that's happened, that's exactly what should be happening. I just don't know if we've done that yet. So until we are able to inflict consequences on the Russians of some sort, then they will keep doing this, both to create instability on our side, and also, I mean, they're mapping out where is everything, what's our response, time. That's what's going on.
And on the Russian jets in Estonia, I think that's a very interesting debate because a lot of people from whom I wouldn't normally expect it were calling afterwards that the next time this happens, the jets should be shut down, or that they should have been shut down when they flew and been in 12 minutes in Estonia's airspace. But other people, including I spoke with Estonia's former Air Force chief, who said that we shouldn't do that because doing that would be exactly what Russia would wanted us to do, because it would create distraction for NATO outside of Ukraine. What do you think should have been the right policy, and what should be the right policy for the next act? Should we have shut down the Russian jets?
Absolutely. Look, this is if this was an isolated incident, then of course, you yell at them and do another sanction on the chief of the Russian Air Force or something and say, don't do that again. But this is in the middle of all this other stuff. And they spent 12 minutes in Estonia. I mean, Estonia, you could fly around Estonia in a jet a couple of times in 12 minutes. So I think this was a gigantic middle finger from the Russians to all of us. They have no respect for us. They have no concern. The fact that they did an operation that launched 21 drones into Poland, knowing that there are 10,000 American troops stationed in Poland, tells you that they had no fear that the U.S. might retaliate somehow or might do anything. So I think we need to, a big part of this is having your own narrative correct. I mean, you make a public case, and you've already thought through the consequences of, okay, if and when we shoot down a Russian aircraft with a pilot, you have to own the information domain immediately, because the Russians will, of course, say, oh, this is a NATO provocation, and et cetera, et cetera. So we need to be preparing the public for why this matters. Start making the case now and lay out, here's what they've been doing. And I've seen so many articles and maps showing all these things. So this has to be done in a very concerted effort. And then you communicate to the Russians and say, look, we're not joking around. The next time one of your aircraft comes through, we are going to seize 1, 2, or 3 of your Shadow Fleet vessels. We're going to seize them, and you'll never see them again, or the oil that's in them, for sure. And if they then do it again, and you say the second time, we're going to shoot down the aircraft, and we hope the pilot lands safely with his parachute. Okay, but we're going to shoot it down. And then you have to make it clear. But if we say that and then we don't do it, then you've got that's the worst.
Yeah. I think one more thing that I'd like to hear your view on is all of this is obviously part of Russia's hybrid war on Europe. And I wonder if you think whether this hybrid war is actually working in Russia's favor. Because my view is that it's doing the opposite of what Russia wants, that it's actually forcing Europeans to accept that there is this Russian threat, and to force people who would otherwise love to pretend that it doesn't exist to start doing something about it, even though it's very slow and much slower than it should be. What is your view?
So what do you think Russia wants to do? If you think that what they're doing now is going to backfire on them, what do you think Russia's objective is? I know you're the host of this podcast, but I'm interested in what you think.
I think probably a few different things. I think probably to create chaos and create confusion, fear, division among NATO members, and as you said, test out what their reactions would be. I think that's roughly the aim behind it.
Yeah, I do too. And you pose a good question. That's why I was interested in what you think. I guess that's the nature of gray zone operations, is that the Russians want to stay below that level of where everybody would obviously say that was an attack and now we're going to crush you. They want to keep it in the area like, well, we're not 100% certain, and the ship's crew, they didn't mean to do this, and you know, and the Russians over the years have invested so much into polluting our minds about whose fault this is. I mean, even a report came out yesterday that supposedly the former German Bundeskanzler Merkel, she was misquoted, I think, where she said it was the fault of Poland and the Baltic, Russia invaded. But nonetheless, she still, even today, is still implying that somehow the Baltics and the Poles had something to did not help. And I mean, that's a huge return on investment for the Russians when you've got a person like that, still saying stuff like that. Even Radek Sikorsky, who is first among equals when it comes to diplomats who talk tough to Russia, even he said, I heard him in Warsaw 3 weeks ago, he said, we're not at war, but it is a crisis. No, a flood is a crisis. Okay. But constant violations of airspace, illegal activities in the ocean, doing things that wreck our economies. I mean, every time an airport gets shut down, that's millions of euro lost. Okay, because think of the business. It's not just people on holiday. Although Munich had to shut down twice in the middle of Oktoberfest, and also on the day the 3rd of October. Not a coincidence. So I think that these are things that have a real impact, and eventually one of these things is going to cause a crash, or one of these drones is going to land on Omar's house, and somebody's going to get hurt, and the Russians don't care. I mean, they are so reckless, and I think we are not doing what we need to do to make sure they know that we actually are serious and that they're going to suffer consequences.
Well, I'd love to talk a lot more about it, a lot longer, but I know that your time is limited. So thank you so much. Even this shorter version was amazing as always. Thank you so much for doing it.
Well, you're a great host, Dominic, and I appreciate the opportunity you give me, and I'll look forward to doing it again in a few weeks, maybe.
For sure. And hopefully I'll get to catch you at one of these conferences at some point, and we'll have a beer.
I like that. Very good.